My parents have this nice little bench in front of their house, and this is how it looks after about 8 years and exposed to any kind of weather all the time. And as you can see, it really needs some care, which I'll do in this video. First of all, I'm taking everything apart. The nuts on one side were quite rusty. And there was a lot of rust inside of the frame pieces. But other than that, they're in good shape and can be reused. Cat is also happy about the weather and me working outside. As the new pieces, we bought rough-sawn large boards from the sawmill. The first step is to cut them in half. To help with that, Bosch sent me this new battery-powered miter saw to test and use for a project. It's one of their new bi-turbo brushless tools, so let's see how it performs. That looks good, and once again for the last board. More on that saw later. I can get 2 boards for the bench out of each of these ones, total of 16. I only need 12 for the bench, so in the end I can choose the best ones with the least defects. Since it's rough-sawn lumber, I now skip plane both sides. That means I skip jointing and only plane the faces in alternating order. The boards will then still have a consistent thickness, but are not necessarily straight. And I can do that because the boards are pretty straight to begin with, and for this project it also doesn't really matter and saves time. Once done and both faces nice and clean, I then jointed one edge straight, which I can then use against the table saw fence to cut the pieces in half. Milling is done and I already sorted through the boards and chose the ones I want to use. Here is already a part missing, there's a crack with sap that's probably going to fall apart. Same on these two. These 12 are good. With the miter saw again, I cut the boards to length all at once. Then I jigged up a couple blocks on the drill press to drill all holes for the bolts at the same position. And finally a round over on all edges. For a finish, my parents bought an oil that's made for this wood species. It's very easy to apply and the leftover can be wiped off after 15 minutes. While the finish is drying, let's have another look at this saw. The first thing I really like about it is the gliding mechanism, because the saw is really big and only this gliding mechanism allows me to put it on my bench. It also works and glides perfectly smoothly, and as hard as I try, I can't feel any play in the joints. But of course, all the way extended, there is some flex. But that flex is to be expected from any motion mechanism that is extended this far while being lightweight. And realistically, during cutting, you're only applying a downward force and no side to side, so you're not introducing any flex. So I don't see that flex as a problem at all. But of course, much more interesting is the power of this tool. Bosch calls these new tools the bi-turbo brushless tools. And that bi-turbo means the combination of their Procore batteries with this new motor technology that they say can output tons of power. In case of this saw, they say you can compare it to a corded tool with up to 2000 watts of power. Let's see how true that is. I don't have a corded one of these, but I do have my table saw, which has a 3000 watt motor. So both tools should be able to cut roughly at the same speed.
The only blade I have that fits both saws is my diamond tooth blade, because my table saw flange has 2 pins through the blade. I'm not wasting good lumber and prepared some pieces of OSB for the test, 10 centimeters thick and 30 centimeters wide. With that blade, my table saw actually can't cut through this thickness, but that shouldn't really matter. For some reference, I'm first making a cut at a reasonable speed. And now faster. But that wasn't the limit. Let's try again. Also didn't stall the motor, but the belt seemed to slip for a moment. One more try. Same belt slipping noise. At least that testing seemed to clean the faces of the saw teeth. Now installing that same blade on the miter saw. Since it has a quick locking nut, it's pretty simple. The saw is actually not designed for cutting the max thickness at that width, but removing the dust shroud solves that issue. First I'll try the big 12 amp hour battery and also going at a reasonable speed. About 14 seconds for that cut. Let's try again and really push the saw. Seems like pushing it really hard cuts a lot slower, because with the slowed down blade you can't really cut fast anymore and have to let it get up to speed again.
I guess I already reached the limit. But still, the fact that this saw can cut this thickness and with a more or less reasonable speed is still pretty impressive. Now I want to see if it can still do the cuts with the 2 smaller batteries.
This is with the 8 amp hour battery, and this time I again tried to keep a constant blade speed. And now the 4 amp hour battery. Yeah, I didn't really stop the time, as you can see.
Yeah, it worked, but yeah, not recommended. You should have the bigger batteries for such stuff. And it also got noticeably warm. It was fully charged before I did the cut, and now it's here.
Let's try cooling it in the airstream of the dust collector. That should be a smart idea.
But then again, this blade was never meant to be used in a miter saw, especially not a battery-powered one. It's meant to be used in a table saw. So I wonder if this blade that's made for a battery saw makes a big difference.
And it makes a difference, and I guess that's because the blade is still quite new and also 0.6 millimeters thinner than the other blade. Both test cuts with the 12 amp hour battery took about 10 seconds. And now the 8 amp hour battery and the thinner blade. Also a lot faster than before. Now with the 4 amp hour battery it's better than before, but still not good. Next question is, how many cuts like that can you do with one charge? For that I did more test cuts like this with the 12 and 8 amp hour batteries and checked their charge after a while. And with that heavy use they also got quite warm after a while.
46 degrees on the side. This one 39, 40. And at their cooling part about 50 and 40 again. Small one, I don't know, it already cooled down. Everything is covered in dust, even the door. I hope you understand why I eventually stopped testing, even though there's still some material left. If the saw outputs 2000 watts, that means at 18 volts it draws over 110 amps from the battery. I don't think that's the case from start to finish of the cut, so let's say it's more of 100 amps on average. I did 12 cuts with the big batteries with an average cut time of 13.45 seconds, so the total amperage used is 100 amps times 13.45 seconds divided by 3600 seconds per hour times 12 cuts. And that equals to about 4.5 amp hours. So the remaining charge in this battery should be 3 bars on this indicator. With the smaller battery I did 9 cuts with an average time of 17.22 seconds. So here the total amperage used is about 4.3. Here the remaining capacity should be a little less than half or 2 bars on this indicator. And that's the case. Using these numbers I could theoretically make 16 cuts with this battery and 32 with the big one. That's pretty good, and it also means that for less intense cuts, these batteries will last a lot longer. And now back to the bench.
I use all new stainless steel hardware, and at first I hammer in some carriage bolts into all holes. And then again a washer and a nut just like before. Repeat that 12 times and you've got yourself a new bench. And lastly, I screwed that metal strip back to the middle of each board. Its purpose is to spread the load more evenly to all the boards.